Arbory Digital Experiences. This is episode 11. I'm Tad Reeves, Principal Architect at Arbory Digital, and I'm joined here by Dwayne Hale, who is our newly appointed CTO of Arbory Digital, as well as Bryce Acker, who is the CEO at Arbory Digital. And today, we're going to talk about AEM war stories, for lack of a better word, the good, the bad, the ugly, the things that have gone well, the things that have gone enormously poorly, and what we've learned about all that, because we've been through a couple things. So we're going to get right into this. First off, though, I want to give a chance for Bryce and Dwayne to introduce themselves. Bryce, why don't you go first?
Sure. And with that introduction, did you just call us old? Is that what you're saying?
Experienced. Experienced.
There you go.
Yes.
Awesome. So, hey, my name's Bryce Acker. Me and partners founded Arbory Digital 5 years ago. Now it's awesome. I've been in the really the consulting world most of my career, and specifically Adobe Experience Manager for about 15 years. Really wet my teeth. Actually, it was Day CQ back in the day, and it has since been rebranded. Built a whole monitoring team with Rackspace, which is where I met Tad and Dwayne, and sort of got the band back together at Arbory. And really happy to have them. And also, like Tad said, congrats to Dwayne, who was just appointed our CTO.
I'm Dwayne Hale. I'm the newly minted CTO of Arbory Digital. I've had little over, I'd say, coming up on 11 years experience in the AEM world, both on the development side of things and on the operations side of things. Prior to that, however, I was developing in something that wasn't AEM. So counting that experience, probably more around 12, 13 years of software development and operations experience.
Outstanding. And for me, I've been in AEM land for the last 14 years, I guess. It's been 2010 when I got involved. I remember very clearly the time when one of my coworkers found out that Day was getting purchased by Adobe. There was audible expletives in both joy and like, what does this mean for the future? Obviously, it's meant a pretty bright and varied future for all of us, because we've gotten a chance to really just get involved in a broad variety of infrastructures and applications and so forth. AEM being the center of a lot of that. And because of the fact that these are usually really massive implementations, usually massive sites for big companies and so forth that has to plug into a lot of things. And as a result, we've gotten a chance to see things go every which way in terms of things.
And if I may real quick, just talking about that acquisition, I remember that distinctly as well. You said that there was a couple different expletives. What does this mean? It really ended up being a great fit for, I think, both companies.
Yes.
And we were partners, trying to sell a company of mine. We were partners with Day Software. And really at that point, like, it was really gaining momentum. But they had, I believe, they had 2 North American sales reps, and they had no development footprint. I believe everything was over in Switzerland at the time of the acquisition. But it was obviously a great tool, even before it got rebranded as WEM and then AEM. Most people don't remember the WEM. But they were starting to sell it, and so all these companies were doing it. I was actually on a project migrating Kellogg's to Kellogg's.com over at the time, and there was really no tech knowledge in North America, so they were partnering with a lot of consulting firms to basically, once they sold the product, to help those customers tailor it to their needs. So it really ended up being a good fit with Adobe, just being able to have a tech team as well, internal house, a lot more product development, but really for the product itself, obviously the Adobe has a world-class sales staff, so they really ratcheted that up and have brought that tool to where it is now, where it's a significant market share across corporate America.
That's right. And I think, though, that the amount of muscle that it brought to the table and the amount of credibility that Adobe brings to the table at that point, because that whole Omniture acquisition had just kind of taken place. So people really knew that Adobe not only was just serious about design, but really serious about web marketing as well. But as a result, as the company's involved, there's so many different requirements that all these different websites have. So many different requirements that like, you know, a big site has. There's no template. There's no one thing.
Well, there's a lot of same but different, right? There's a lot of things that people do similarly, and then there's a lot of customization. So everyone has their own bespoke use cases as well.
That's right. Well, firing into this, the format that I wanted to go with on this, just to kind of get things started, was to kind of plumb the depth a little bit of some of the things that Dwayne, you and Bryce have seen over the course of doing a lot of different AEM implementations. Because the three of us, we put together a list of all of the companies that we've dealt with and all the different sites that we've dealt with, and that list it's long. It's shockingly long. Yeah, I'm like, oh, I remember that one. Oh, that was terrible. Oh, yeah, good. Well, that one was over.
It was a neat exercise because there were. I mean, there's a handful of like 3-month projects that I've done that.
That's right.
Without going back and going through a lot of old logs and a lot of old, just notes I've taken from different various projects or whatnot, and lessons learned. You totally forget about some of those smaller ones too, even though some of those are were very foundational as well. That's right.
Some of those 3-month ones were pretty intense. But here's my first, I guess, leading question. So in terms of AEM or implementation projects, we don't even necessarily have to limit this just to AEM, but I know where our experience lies here. So in terms of a team, what would you say was the best composed team that you've been on, where you had developers, architects, QA folks, project management? It was right sized for the task at hand. Like they were ultimately successful because they had the right number of people, not way too overboard, just only surviving through complete throngs of people. But it was a good team and got the job done. Does any projects come to mind for that?
Dwayne, you want to take that first? I got one specifically.
Yeah, I've got one from years ago. You may or may not remember it, Bryce, but it was when I worked prior to managed services. I was working in consulting, and that's kind of how I've come back around. But the team was mainly all in-house, and really the only parts of the team that weren't actually part of the consultancy that was working with this customer was the QA. People were provided by the customer. They knew the website in and out and the functionality of it in and out way better than anybody we would have brought in third party or even from our own organization. And the business stakeholders, of course, they were from the customer themselves. But everything else, it was right-sized in terms of project managers, right-sized in terms of development, and right-sized in terms of both having operations people that could help spin up or deploy code, spin up dev boxes, spin up staging boxes. And it really was, it's kind of a double-edged sword, because I'm sure we'll get to that in later questions. But when you're talking about the composure of the team, it was really the ideal situation. And the skill sets of the team as well really meshed together well.
I think one of the challenges, I was going to say one of the challenges in that is acquiring such a team. Like, it's one thing when it's fortuitous that you have all these people there, right? But it's another thing to try to keep that team together and try to like, or say, hey, we want to implement AEM. Let's have this team. Let's have a team of that size, because especially now that AEM is so much more mature, it's pretty difficult to hire as full-time employees a team of that size.
Yeah, totally agree. Honestly, with more experience, people, depending on the project, it can get sort of long in the tooth. And as people gain experience and confidence, with the tool, with the platform, they want to go solve bigger and bigger problems. And that's sometimes hard to keep a whole team focused on one problem, depending on the size and complexity of it. So mine would have been really, I think that like one of the best, largest teams that I worked on for was the My Ford mobile project. And it was honestly because it was there's so many technologies involved in it as well, and really such a front and center focus for Ford at the time. And so this was their first mobile app that it really connected with their vehicles. It was around 2012, I think, something that time frame. It was they had a new car called the C-Max, which is sort of a glorified golf cart, honestly, at the time. But electric vehicles have come a long way in a decade. But the mobile app would interact with the car, tell you where the car's at. You could program charging times. You could see, your battery state. There was a lot of gamification to it too, where there were regional and global like leaders lists on I think like I don't know, miles driven and energy saved and various other categories. And it was obviously a website as well, so myfordmobile.com. So it was a mobile app and a web version of that. And then the plumbing behind the scenes, obviously, you're dealing with vehicles, and so there's inboard like on the car computers that have a cell signal out. It had their own IP address, right? That's going into this whole management tier, or there's a large database and a large sort of controlling application that would interact with the cars, and that surfaced sort of an API for our side of the house, which was the mobile app and the website, and all of that was sort of derived out of AEM itself. And I say sort of, the website was all managed within AEM. There was a lot of trials and tribulations around that project that were sort of firsts. Adobe had recently acquired PhoneGap, which was Adobe Cordova, which is a library allowing you to build a mobile application and write a mobile application and sort of build it to multiple platforms. So I think they did Windows Phone, but we only targeted iOS and Android at the time. But basically, it's one code base, but built to both platforms. And so we had a large team. We had a large onshore team and also offshore that I was helping manage and architect the AEM solution of it. We were working hand in hand with Adobe Engineering because, again, they had just bought that product, Adobe. It was Apache Cordova, branded as PhoneGap. And so it was the very first mobile app using PhoneGap published, where the content came from AEM. And so for the mobile app itself, it wasn't actually pulling from AEM server. It got packaged. So it was authored in AEM. The whole website was driven by AEM. But when you went to build the mobile application for the store, it was pulling the content out of AEM and then creating a package for the App Store. But I felt it was staffed really well. We had all these different skill sets and tools and platforms that we had to interact across teams. We had weekly, meetings across those leads. We had internal, project plans per expertise. I think there was a lot of lessons learned that I loved from that project. A lot of us were actually traveling up and going to Chicago at the time, and we had a whole floor. And for our stand-ups, there was a lot of soccer fans on that team, and so we sort of get in a big circle. Again, we had the space to even do this too, so there would be about 30 people in a big circle, and you weren't able to give your update unless you had the ball, and then you kick it to someone else, and then they give their sort of stand-up update. And it kept it quick. It kept it to the point, and it also, was very collaborative. So there's still a lot of colleagues from that project that I keep in touch with, and it's really interesting to see how many have gone to be sort of captains of industry, leaders, tech leads, started their own companies themselves, and from that whole project. So it was I think Ford had the budget, they had the corporate focus on it, and staffed it really, really well.
I think one of the things too that a lot of successful projects that I've been on have that's similar to what you're just saying there is that when you've got a whole bunch of disciplines, but a lot of times there are multiple different areas where those have to be in, then you end up having to be really flexible and appropriate with how you deal with remote learners, and not have a bunch of stops on whether or not you can have people. If you need to get people all at the same time to go and talk something over, that you get them all in the house at the same time to talk something over. It's
Yep.
tough when you have kickoffs and so forth that don't occur, that are all remote. People haven't met each other. They don't know their communication styles and all that sort of stuff. And it becomes really, really tough to really kind of get the team humming.
Yeah. And what was also interesting is we didn't interface with them too often because it's mostly like the mobile app development or the database and that whole focus. But we did actually find a critical bug in the logic of the programs on the vehicle itself. And then ended up like, we initially thought it was within our code, and then we found we were giving the proper commands and everything was there, and it was actually in the logic and the chip in the car. And so worked with the engineering teams in Detroit that were part of that programming that. So and got access to them, right? So sometimes that's a hard thing to do is to say there's a bug in someone else's stuff, and we need the right appropriate engineers to help look at this.
Oh, yeah.
But they got us all together.
Well, switching gears from teams and how well composed or not well composed they are, let's talk about deployment and pipeline and process around that. What's a team that you've seen that really kind of had things together in terms of a site that was easy to deploy to? It was reliable to deploy to. Like there wasn't a lot of deployment related outages, so the testing was the right amount of testing to be able to get stuff done.
Sure.
Any takers there?
Yeah, I'll start on that one, Dwayne. So there's a couple of different projects. I've liked this paradigm. From the get-go, if you can implement it, it's not trivial to get to that point where your CI/CD pipeline is tuned and well-oiled, is pointed to the right environments. Everyone knows how to use it. There's knowledge around how it works and the shortcomings, and then as well as the training of the development teams, and everyone's comfortable with what branches we're using, where we check things in. But there's been a couple different projects that I've been on, the one with the World Bank, that Ford project, and a couple different other ones that we instrumented where it really was the development process was streamlined in the fact that when you check in your code to certain branches, it would automatically trigger deployment processes. And a lot of people do that now, but they can go back 10 years. That was not the norm. And one of the other things that I always was impressed with that I haven't actually seen implemented really well across the board at a lot of different projects, a lot of different companies, was commit messaging enforcement rules where, to commit code, you had to tie it to a story. It had to be formatted properly. I think that tools like Fisheye, or I believe in that case, but there's a couple different tools there. But it would auto tag your commits. It would link to that story. You could look through your GitHub repository and drill directly into that Jira story, see who the people were that integrated with it, and then soup to nuts, the whole CI/CD platform was running all the deployments. And or another thing that a lot of companies don't get to, that we've always stressed, that is clearly best practice, but it's sometimes hard to do, and we're still dealing with some customers right now that are not in this case, but promoting your builds up instead of rebuilding per environment. So it's obviously you can rebuild dev lots of times, and maybe even in the QA, but that release package that you're testing on, you should never rebuild that release package when you're going to the production environment. You there can be something that's added to it that you're not sure. Someone might have cherry picked something out of it. It's not necessarily the exact same package that you're releasing that you tested on. So you don't have that 100% certainty that the same code that you validated in your non-prod UAT environments is the same thing that we're releasing in production if you don't just promote packages versus rebuild them.
Yeah. That's something that we've been, I think the first blog post I even ever wrote was on that exact subject. And I think that was like in 2015 or something like that. And it's been the case since then that yeah, you don't want to just keep building because you don't know what you're putting into prod. You don't know what somebody
north star to get to that a lot of companies don't necessarily get to, but I would stress that it's worth the investment to focus on those CI/CD pipelines and to really work out those kinks and understand that it will save cost and time down the road.
Now, in terms of ugly, any you guys have stories you want to share on ways that went south? Because sometimes people are like, yeah, but it's costly to make a pipeline, so maybe we'll do it later.
Yeah. I don't know if you have anything on that, do you?
Yeah, I've run into plenty of customers that without berating them in their development cycles or anything like that, they would literally build the package locally on one developer's machine, upload it to package manager, click install, and it very rarely actually was successful. There was a lot of reverting back and then figuring out what went wrong with that particular build and then trying again. And kind of to your point, Bryce, I've also been on the other side of that fence where you have automatic builds to your dev, your QA, your stage. Then you manually build a tagged release out to, this was 2013. So we weren't quite there where you're using an artifact repository, but we were using tagged builds for production. So you knew exactly what ended up in production, everything that it, to your point, having release notes that then drilled into the individual user stories or bug fixes. That was also linked to the individual feature branches or bug fix branches. So you could go back and see exactly what was changed, when it was changed. And it did give you somewhat of a chain of custody and make sure if you're deploying, 1.58, that is exactly what you're deploying. And like I said before, I've seen the exact opposite where, the lead devs Maven building the package on their local and then physically uploading it into package manager. And it's usually bad idea, basically.
Yeah. Honestly, before CI/CD, we were managing code in packages of CQ packages. Basically, like you'd have, like I had a whole file system that was just packages that were just like versions of the code. And I think that was even really Git was just coming around and being adopted at the time. A lot of the initial projects were on either like Perforce or Maven, or see if we even had a code repository on some of the very, very earlier ones I was on.
Or Subversion.
Subversion, yeah, that's SVN for sure. I think honestly, Adobe's is still on Subversion for Adobe.com and their whole code base.
But I think you can get a little bit too overboard on that too, because there's all these kind of North Stars that you want to go for.
Sure.
Where you're like, we don't want to go down again because somebody did something janky and so we're going to put all this process in. There's the right amount of process to put in also, because then you have an overly prescriptive, overly restrictive deployment pipeline where to get anything done, like let's just say you notice that one little thing is a QA fail in prod or something, or you have an issue, and the only way to get it back through to prod is whatever 2 hours worth of required pipeline steps to go this, and it has to go through this check, and then it has to go through this third party thing, and then it has to go this, and then it's finally at dev, and then you have to go this, and then now it goes to stage. Now it has to get an automated load test, and then it and then that was just to change like a rewrite rule or something like that. So there's the right size, and then there's too far. And I think that there's judgment that has to be applied as to there's not a one size that fits all for everybody.
And if I may, so I wouldn't call it a CI/CD, but another awesome one that we did was, it was our team at Rackspace, honestly. And I said Dwayne and Peter, one of my partners, put together a fantastic automation stack where not doing code deployments necessarily in this case, but doing AEM environment deployments. And so we really did a good job of standardizing, especially for all of the sites that we were supporting. One, we knew, so we had a team supporting, like 30 plus of the largest AEM sites worldwide. And initially, when I first took over that team, it was all bespoke. And so we really quickly learned that we need to make these in a standardized way so that when you come into an environment and you're trying to support all of these various customers, you know where to look, sort of what might go wrong. All the configurations are the same. All the locations are the same. All the versions, we know exactly what AEM version is being deployed out in that. And that whole, I think it was Ansible Tower, and then whatever the open source version of that is, ran and orchestrated all of that. So doing the setup of the operating system, doing the configuration of the operating system, and there's some types of disk locks sometimes that we used to run into issues with, installing AEM, upgrading AEM, securing AEM. So where you're hardening it, turning off HTTP requests, installing SSL certs, that didn't used to be trivial back in the day. A lot of those, we take it for granted how mature the product is at this point. But there was a lot of undocumented, dark areas of AEM that once we figure out how to do it, we were then able to script it and automate it and repeat that over and over and over for all of our customers. As well as, you build out dev. Now we're going to build out UAT in the same way, maybe instance size it up a little bit, build out production in the same way. And you have that certainty that you have like for like for like. And so that automation stack, I was always really impressed with where we got to on that whole tool set.
Yeah. And kind of on the other side of the fence of that, even if you're not managing, like we were, what was 120 plus AEM installations, dev, QA, UAT for, 30 something customers. Even if you're just a small shop and, you're trying to deploy to your production website, you're not, if you follow infrastructure as code, you're not going to likely run into the scenario of, hey, one of our core functionalities relies on, let's say, ACS Commons, and then you deploy your code to prod and that package is missing because you didn't embed it into your Maven build, and Bob, who was supposed to install it, ended up taking a vacation day, 2 days before the deployment, and didn't communicate, or communication broke down that package hadn't been installed yet. So it could really, it could really save a lot of headache down the road.
Yeah, poor Bob. He didn't install that package.
Now, another one I want to talk to, above and beyond, because we're talking about deployments and updates and things like that. But then there's the topic of, once it's out there, how do you keep an eye on it? And so that's the subject of monitoring and alerting and log analysis. So where have you seen that go really well, and where have you seen the wrong amount of that taking place?
Yes. Do you want this one first?
Yeah, I'll take this one.
Okay.
So one of the times that it's probably fits a couple different categories. It's the probably the worst outage I've ever been a part of. We had a, let's say, consumer services customer, and they would send out newsletters for new offerings, new, not necessarily new products, but new things that you could, go and do with this particular customer. And their interdepartmental communication was not the best. So their marketing team had sent out a newsletter that contained UTM tracking codes that hadn't been communicated to the operations team, which was us at the time, and hadn't been communicated to the developers. So nobody on the operations end of things knew to ignore those parameters at the dispatcher level, because your front end code is what's really going to reach out to your analytics engine and say, hey, X amount of people came in with this UTM tracking code. So because there was a lack of communication there, we ended up getting, an alert. Well, it wasn't. We got an alert that their publishers were, starting to run out of resources and basically going to get ready to fall over. But at the same time, the customer contacted us and they're, hey, we're getting reports that the site is really slow to use for the new newsletter content we sent out. Can you guys take a look at it? And at the time, we didn't have any kind of log aggregation per se, but we knew what to look for typically when your publisher is getting hit by a lot of requests. It's usually query strings that you didn't account for either within the code itself, if you actually have to use those query strings, or you didn't account for ignoring them at the dispatcher. In this case, it was UTM codes. And so every request for this newsletter content was coming in and then hitting the backend publisher. So it kind of fits both categories. One of the worst outages basically was customer caused. And then it kind of fits the other category of, even though we didn't have log management, we knew what to look for in the logs because we had experienced this across, a couple different customers. Now, that may not be the case if, let's say you're the ops guy at Megacorp, and you don't really know to look for that, right? Because you may not have had the experience of customer A doing the same thing, a year and a half ago or 6 months ago. And so that really was one of the times that, being aware of what typically is in your logs and what is, an anomaly really helped out and got them back up on their feet within, maybe half hour, however long it took to modify the dispatcher config and then reload the configuration. And then we immediately started seeing the publisher performance coming up and the resource utilization going back down.
Good. Makes sense.
That's sorry, I had an internet hiccup there, but here we are. But to your point there too, like in terms of being able to pin down what's an anomaly and what's regular, that's where aggregation is so important, and that's where I've seen this happen so many times where you say, hey, it's mostly good, or if we need something, we can download some logs, but where that basically eliminates your ability to tell whether or not something was an anomaly or whether or not something is isolated. And that's sometimes that is everything. So you're like, oh yeah, I always see those in the logs. Don't worry about that. It's always in the logs. Well, is it? Did it really, did it start during only this time? So because there's sometimes that I said, hey, I finally got my dashboard together, and guess what? Did you know that the whole website was hard down for 8 hours last night? You didn't, because you thought, Akamai was picking it up. But in reality, any non-cached response, which is this whole subsection of the site, was actually hard down the whole night. Yeah. And your monitoring wasn't catching that. So a lot of times too, you're not going to get that data unless you've got enough gear that's looking for that and is testing for all those different eventualities.
Yep. So best dashboard and monitoring that I've seen, and the worst, was same company. We go back to my Rackspace days. So we had this tool. It was CA's Introscope, and because of some projects like Dwayne's talking about there, another similar website. So in this case, it was Fox Sports. They had a cache hit ratio of 3%. So needless to say, and they scaled up all their publisher tiers. They had a bunch of dispatcher tiers, and there was a whole, that architecture was very bespoke, very custom. We really actually inherited it, but made a lot of changes and a lot of improvements there over time. But because of that, and because of all the issues that they were having, we really put together what I felt was the best monitoring, alerting, dashboarding I've really ever seen in my career. And I could, because we were a 24/7, 365 support team. This was not just like me and then my AEM architects or engineers or anything that's looking at this. This is a wider team of site reliability engineers and 50 plus other people that are really like Java and Linux experts, but not as deep of a expertise in AEM, for instance. And so they need to look at it. And so we had this dashboard that for every customer, I could go in and it was just literally Like I love to get to a single pane of glass that had all of the publisher threads, all the author threads that I felt were important. Tiered into these are the most critical pieces for this customer, and it's all right here in one view. It was all aggregated. The charts were fantastic. The alerting, the monitoring, everything worked really, really well. We did a lot of work, to your point, Dwayne, in log analysis and log aggregation, where certain strings that we knew, if they popped up, stuff's going to go south pretty quickly. All those eventually would trigger alerts, and or it was a net new one. We knew exactly how to add that to our alert monitor there. Same company, worst monitoring experience. The business made a decision that they wanted to go with a cheaper tool set, and so they canceled that license and basically told us we had to redo everything that we had just spent the past 2 years doing. And so no slight on New Relic, but we switched over to New Relic, and we never ever got to a point where I felt comfortable that I could come in and I could see, I knew exactly the state everyone was in. Never really got alerting going, never got any of the monitoring, any of the log aggregation, definitely no good dashboards or anything like that. And sadly, then the year after that, they switched tools again. And so to me, that was such a lesson learned in the fact that the decision was, to reduce costs. They had determined that the current license was more expensive than the other tool set, but they clearly did not make a decision based on the cost to re-implement everything that we'd done, plus the time, sink already in there, and the cost that they put into it, the investment to get to a point where everything was just, the trains were running on time, right? And now all of a sudden we're going to go to a whole new platform and you have to redo everything again. We never got there. And then clearly the team sort of got a little jaded too, because then they changed tools again the subsequent year. So you never got to a point where, why would we put the investment in this when they might just, yank the rug out from underneath us again? So it was a terrible experience for quite a little bit there, because there was essentially no monitoring, even though we had a monitoring tool.
Well, that's the thing too, is that usually for a single company, you can it's a lot easier to do some cost estimation of like, well, what's an outage worth? Like, so I'm down for 10 minutes or I'm down for an hour, then what's that worth to the company? Because a lot of times there is a number that you can put on that in terms of either it's lost revenue because it's an e-commerce site, or it's lost if the brand is impacted by that, then you usually put a number on that too. But if it's across a larger number of customers all at the same time, you're like, good, well, is it worth losing a customer because now all of a sudden you didn't see it coming? It went down and you did not see it coming. Because that's always the goal. Is that it's not just, this is the other like question that I run into with customers saying that it's okay to just rely on front end monitoring, because front end monitoring just tells you it's already slow or already down.
Right.
And you should have caught it first. You should have caught it when it was starting to look like it was going to go down. And because the ideal is you're not down. The ideal is it's always humming. So you gotta catch it first. And a lot of times, especially with AEM,
proactive versus reactive.
Yes. Because that's a lot of times too, is that like a lot of times when you get an AEM instance that spins out of control, right? The moment that it started to spin out of control, a lot of times is like 8 hours before it actually died. And this even applies to AEM as a cloud service. I had a very recent experience of this where cloud service wasn't auto scaling, should have auto scaled, did not, was not, started dying, and it was dying repeatedly, hours and hours before it actually died. No monitoring caught it because it actually hadn't failed yet, but the CPU was rising on a container and it rose until it just died, didn't auto scale, and then actually know that the service was taken out. When should you have acted? You should have acted 8 hours before it died, not when the front end monitor finally said it died. So it's not having that is kind of huge. Well, let's switch gears a little bit then now too. So when it comes to planning of a migration, because it feels like, I don't know, for all of us, like especially before the age of when stuff started to go cloud service, it seemed like almost everybody's project was somewhere in the middle of a migration. So, and that's still, as consultants, a lot of what we end up getting into is somebody going from one version to another. They're going from on-premise to cloud, cloud back to on-premise. That's happening as well. Off onto edge delivery. There's all these things to plan with respect to a migration. What's one where you saw things, you saw estimation and team sizing and so forth done really well from a project planning perspective?
Yeah, I could take that. So I saw that, back with the double-edged sword project I was talking about earlier. The team, it didn't really apply in this context because they were coming from a separate content management system altogether. But the project just migrating from that system to the current AEM system they were looking to go onto took better part of, I want to say, a year and a half, just because of all the different, moving parts of everything. And so, during those times, more service packs come out. So with trying not to put them on a platform that is already outdated by the time they launch on it, we already incorporated in the development cycles, hey, here's the release notes for the service pack. Is that going to impact any of the functionality on the site? No. All right, let's get that in the dev. We'll let it simmer in dev for a little while as we continuously build to it. See, via automated testing and physical QA testers, let's see, does it affect any of the functionality of the site, and then promote that up through, dev, QA, UAT to an eventual where they are on the latest service pack in production. And it's not this, hair on fire. It's already 6 months old. They're releasing another service pack. We got to, play catch up with whatever's the latest. We had already incorporated that into the migration plan. So there was time, there was resources to address that before ever even going live. And I've seen kind of the exact opposite of that. I had a customer realize that this was fairly recently. They were still on 6.2, one of the latest service packs for that, but it's unsupported. So they had come to us and said, hey, spin up 6.5 at development environment. And they deployed their code, deployed some test content. It totally broke. And they come back and say, hey, spin down the environment. We don't have the development resources to even address this migration because we didn't account for these things and the major differences between the platforms themselves. Because as you guys know, we didn't recommend at the time moving from, such a large jump from 6.2 to 6.5 without actually doing the homework. And in place migration was already out of the question because it was too many jumps to get to the final end destination.
Well, and 6.2 was pretty broken as well, I believe.
Yeah. even when it was new, it had its quirks, but that was probably one of the worst planned migrations I had seen versus the other one, which even though it was years ago, I think they were moving to 6.1 or 6.2. We had already incorporated that into the development lifecycle, right? That, hey, this project's going to take so long, we're going to have to address the service pack elephant in the room.
Right. And I think part of that so for me too, on that planning of a migration and executing a migration, a lot of times you want to be able to say, hey, this thing just came out, I want to do this thing. And then you want to just do it. But with a big website, there's so many dependencies. There's people to get. There's things that you weren't thinking of and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I would say probably of all the migrations that I did, just one I'm thinking of right now is a medical devices company. And the upgrade that was done was preceded by a whole discovery project where we looked at all the dependencies and so forth and looked at good. Well, here's a best practices analyzer report. And here's what we got to do. And there's a bunch of this stuff. So okay, so here's how big the software development project is going to be, capacity planning, who are the people, all that sort of stuff, and then rolling into an actual implementation with a fully defined set of requirements that came from enough time spent on it. And then you've got high quality project manager, high quality person doing customer relations and so forth, so that the tech guys are just focusing on tech. I don't think it can be really overstated how important that is. Like all of us on this call right now have worn the client relations and project manager hat at the same time as trying to be a technical architect and a developer and a sysadmin. And that's a hard set of context switches to be doing on a regular basis. That's just rough. So having somebody do that is like, that's gold. I don't know that a good project manager knows exactly how much that they really bring to the table, but it's big.
It is big. It's you know, I've worked with a lot of different project managers, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the good ones are worth their weight in gold. And you know, they keep things rolling. They ask the right questions. They have the foresight to see bottlenecks down the road. Like, you know, if this doesn't get done, that's going to delay all these other steps down the road. And you really have to sort of understand how the puzzles put together to put those pieces together. And it's not trivial. And usually, obviously, I always find the best teams are really strong architect and a project manager that are really good, really good partnership relationship. I'm not going to try and name names of some of the poor projects on my end, but poorly planned. Early on in my career, just in regards to planning itself, one of the best rules of thumbs that I've used that actually, I don't know why it works, but it works decently well, is put it all down, estimate it out, do your best effort on an estimation of how you really think things are going to take from the tech perspective, whatever, and then add 40%.
Yeah.
There's so much either churn or unknowns or delays on waiting on ancillary teams or delays on decisions from leadership or, you know, whatever it is that you can never plan. And
that's right.
So even if you have the most perfect project plan, it's shiny, it has everything in the steps, it's down to the second, it doesn't matter. The reality is it's going to be slightly different, if not wholly different from that plan. So, and I think that a lot of teams too, so the plan can be a living, breathing document, right? Don't be afraid to change it once you get into it. The facts change. You know, I've seen that done really well, and I've seen that done poorly, where they pointed to the plan and they said, no, the deadline was tomorrow, so launch it. And it's like, it's not ready, but you know, we can fool ourselves that we put this plan down 6 months ago, and you know, maybe it's going to take us 7 months instead of 6. You know, make sure it's ready before launching it, depending on the use case. But you know, some of the worst projects didn't even have a plan, I'd say, that I've been on, and that is typically very clear. And sometimes you get into those quagmires and you don't even know how to get out of them because there just is not a plan. I would say some of the, you know, you preface as with ugly. So one of the worst ones I saw was really more like a holistic project where they just did not future think at all. We came in and it wasn't an AEM project actually. So it was EMC's Documentum, and a very large tax accounting firm. You have pretty much 4 to choose from, right? One of those. We came in, we're doing their tax file system for them. When we came into the project, it had already been going on for 2 or 3 years, and it was $15 million, and they were scrapping it all. And the reason was because the product and the solution that they had chosen, which by the time they made that decision, it should have been obvious, but it wasn't. It was really a transition period, a lot of different things. The whole tool, the previous paradigm was an application that got deployed on every single like employee's workstation. And instead they were going to more of a web-based sort of a SaaS model type system. And the whole platform and everything around it was clearly a big industry shift that was changing. But, you know, they spent years developing this tool that was no longer going to be supported. And EMC had made that clear, no longer going to be supported, and really was a terrible paradigm that, you know, worked before we had a lot of like very robust websites where you could just hook in and be a SaaS service. But so they went, I think it was 2 or 3 years, $15 million, and decided to start from scratch. Only a company like that sort of mints money, you can get away with those types of decisions, and you know, not everyone got canned and whatnot. But yeah, so I think that's definitely one of the ugliest I've seen. I've really worked well with, or really been on some great projects with great project managers. There's actually a lady out of Bounteous is one of the best I've ever worked with, and she just really did a good job of making sure the plan was updated, that there was dependencies built in, that you had, you know, decent estimations on what we could estimate out, and could estimate that whole project plan out, and really ran a tight ship in regards to, you know, stand-ups and sprint planning and retrospectives and any of those things that can be just boring, mundane things. But if you do it right, and if you're not spending too much time on it, you can really get a lot out of those meetings. And also just even on daily, you know, status stand-ups, like, what are your blockers? What are you doing today? What'd you do yesterday? Ran a tight ship so that it was bang, bang, bang. We got it done. No one got bored. Most that ever went would be like a half hour. But for the team that size, you get done in 15 minutes and everyone could get on to their work. And because of that, it wasn't a burden to people, where I've seen a lot of projects where the stand-up just, you know, you get into a lot of solutioning. There's 10 people in there, but only 2 are really doing something, and everyone's sort of checked out. You never really get to the true status of those things. So,
yep. I think.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think for those, it's part of it. There is recognizing that not everybody's the same, and not everybody is the team isn't just an amorphous blob of people, but people have jobs, and people are good at certain things, and you got to let the guys who are really good at those things do those things. But if you're trying to solution on something, you need a couple of architects there, and then the developer's concerned. You don't need every single last person, including the designers and all of it. It's just it's a waste of time. So somebody knows how to
done it before too.
Yep.
You know, I think that's where we come in a lot. We've done, you know, tons of migrations. I think it could be in the hundreds at this point, collectively as a team. And, you know, we're able to use all of those former project plans. I think one thing that we do really well with customers is sit down with them for a week and go through all their requirements, because that's another thing that without the experts in, a lot of companies don't think through a lot of those requirements. What are our objectives here? What are our load time objectives? What are these key performing indicators that we know that we were successful at the end of the day? Also, get all the subject matter experts in a room and ask them, you know, what they need the tool to do. A lot of companies don't really do the due diligence up front to ask the wider teams that are going to be using this tool or this platform, you know, what is it that you're getting out of it? What does the current state not get you? What are you hoping to add in the future, and have those conversations ahead of time while going into the planning portion of it?
Absolutely. I think that's if I was gonna try to put a bow on, like, you know, what you're like, are we old? I don't think we're old, but what have we gotten from experience, and what is the value that experience can bring is being able to establish requirements before a project. And that, to me, that is the essence of an excellent project and what is going to be a successful project. Because you take something like, oh, we didn't really plan for any users in China, but we've got users in China. But hold on, we bought this whole other thing that just doesn't even work there, and we already signed a 3-year contract with them, and they don't even work in China.
That's like your topic, but yes, exactly.
Yeah, but that's an example of you know, you could have found that out if you'd adequately done your requirements work beforehand. You'd gotten down to the bottom of what needs to be done and so forth. So, and I think that also comes down to like why I like being experienced yet, you know, small and nimble and so forth, is because a lot of times what these projects get driven by, some SVP got a really good, really slick PowerPoint from somebody, or went to a conference and he's super pumped about something, and you got to say, I get that the sales guy told you a great story, but what we need to figure out if that's the right tool for you, or if that's the right way for you. And I might be making the sales guy mad with what I tell you, but sorry about that.
Yeah.
I'm trying to look out for you.
And one of the things that I've taken away from some of these really bad migration plans, and some of them haven't been super terrible. I mean, they almost got us completely through the migration. I had a banking customer. You guys might be aware of the customer, and they were moving from 6.4 to 6.5. Well, we had already migrated all the content, their code, everything was migrating. We were on target for the, actual go live date. And I want to say it was about a week before the go live date. They brought in one of their subject matter experts on the requirements, or not requirements, but on the regulations that were applied to them. And come to find out that all the content was showing up in AEM as being altered as admin with the last modified date of when we ran the migration script. So we had to scrap all of that because they had to preserve the metadata as is from 6.4 to 6.5. Yeah. So we had to go back and basically kind of reinvent the wheel around CRX to Oak, because that would preserve essentially every property of the node when you brought it from one AEM instance to the next. So knowing that in the beginning, it would have been a simple yes or no question. Do you have to preserve all metadata? Knowing that in the beginning would have saved a lot of headache and a lot of wasted time, getting almost to the finish line. You're a block away, you're running a marathon, you see the finish line, and then next thing you know, boop, you got to go back to the beginning and basically start from scratch. Now, it would have been worse had it not just been the content. That was something that, once we developed a process around CRX2 Oak, we were able to execute that within, a couple work days. But still, it, delayed the project by about a week and a half, 2 weeks, while we, went back to the drawing board and figured out, hey, how are we going to get the content from this instance over to this instance without modifying it at all?
Yep.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense for sure.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for battle stories at this point. But man, it's been great. Now I've got all these old memories to bring back. But
yeah,
yeah, but yeah, thanks you guys for coming on, and yeah, we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. Try not to have too many nightmares tonight thinking about horrible.
There's a couple projects
yeah, there's a couple ones like that too. Specifically, Bryce, where I remember you like, yeah, I actually haven't slept all day because yeah. So because for example, we haven't even touched on the subject of backups, and that that could be a whole other PTSD inducing podcast episode.
I think we should. There's some good stories on that for sure. Awesome.
All right, good. All right, well, see you guys
next time. Have a good one.